friends, and welcome back to Player's Companion. So a long time ago on my personal channel, we did a top 10 board games for 2 players. So today we're doing 10 more of the best board games that we've come across for 2 players. We have compiled our favorite games to play together that hopefully you will enjoy as well.
So a couple of notes. We do have an older version of this from a few years ago, which of course have different titles on it. And on that, you'll notice a few things that are absent from this list that you might think are natural inclusions. So if you're missing something like Seven Wonders Duel or Splendor, there's a few that are on there. These games will be listed in no particular order. They're just going to be 10 of our favorites. And they aren't necessarily all specifically 2-player games, but we found they're ones that scale really well for 2 players, so they've worked really well for us.
So the first game that I want to talk about is one of those classic 2-player games, and that is Patchwork. We have the fun Halloween edition. There's so many different editions, it's almost like Monopoly at this point. So you're basically trying to make a quilt. Each player has their own board in front of them, and you go around with a little wooden peg selecting pieces of quilt to put onto your own board, and they're all in fun shapes. So the challenge is to fill up as much of your board as possible, because you lose points at the end per blank space that you leave on the board.
It's a fun light game. It's very quick to play and very quick to learn, and it is only for 2 players. So it's perfectly balanced for a nice light one-on-one game. Our next game is Cosmic Encounter Duel. Some of you will already be familiar with the original game, Cosmic Encounter, because that's been around for several decades now. This one is a specifically 2-player rendition of that game, where the players just battle back and forth, representing different alien races, each still on a conquest to destroy and conquer 5 different alien worlds. The trademark of this game is the absolute chaotic sense of humor that it has. Now, it's not for everybody in that it does have a bit of randomness to it, and not every player appreciates that. It's a very light game with a lot of combat and a lot of surprises to it, and just a really weird sense of humor. So if you want to have a good laugh, that's definitely one to check out.
Next up is Tang Garden. So this one is one of the games that is marketed for 1 to 4 players, which is great because that means it also has a solo mode. Tang Garden is a tile placement game where you're building a garden that takes place in the Tang Dynasty era. You're cooperatively building, but it is still a competitive game. So you score points based on, everybody has different characters that they get, and the characters want to be looking at certain pretty landscapes within the garden, and you score off of where you place your characters, essentially.
Part of the game is also set collection, as you're trying to either get the most shrines or the most different types of trees, or plant different types of flowers, or collect different birds and insects. And depending on how well you collect them and which characters or patrons you have and what they like to see, it'll change your score drastically.
It's a very peaceful, serene game. You have big panoramic pieces that make the background, and that's another thing that your characters want to be looking at, because it is all so beautiful.
Next up, we have The Lost Ruins of Arnak. This game is a combination of a couple of different very popular mechanics. It's both deck building and worker placement. So you'll be putting your workers out on the board in order to have them explore new areas of the jungle and gain different resources, fight monsters, and just find new places to go and to challenge. But even as you do so, you'll be using the resources you find there to buy new cards to put into your deck. Your deck will contain things like jeeps, whips, guns, different pack animals, things like that you'll need to explore the jungle environment. The better the cards you have in your deck, the further into the jungle you can go with your workers. Additionally, there's an archaeology path on the side of the board, which is one of the major ways to score. So you can take extra arrowheads, gems, and different things you find on the jungle path and turn those in order to learn new secrets about the culture that comes from the Kingdom of Arnak.
The next on the list is Wingspan, which is one of my personal all-time favorite board games. So this game in particular, you are playing like an ornithologist, bird watcher, and you're trying to collect birds, and the birds go into 3 different categories. So you have the forest, meadow, or the wetlands. So you roll dice to gain food. The food then attracts the birds to the different terrariums that they belong in, and then the birds lay eggs, which is one of the ways that you gain points. You gain points per bird. It's really an engine building game. As you add birds, that's really where you get your powers and how you build up your engine.
Next up on our list is Marvel Champions. Now this game slips on our list today because we covered Arkham Horror in our previous game, and you're going to find between a lot of the living card games put out by Fantasy Flight. So the Lord of the Rings card game, Arkham Horror, and now Marvel Champions all kind of have similar DNA between them. Marvel Champions is more of a light, fast-paced game that's all about clobbering the heck out of villains. In Champions, each player has their own Marvel hero. You'll charge them up by getting their unique weapons and attacks and everything out on the board. In order to do that, though, you have to make some very interesting choices. You don't have money or mana or things like in other card games to pay for your cards. Instead, you have to discard cards from your hand in order to pay for other cards in your hand. So in order to get, say, Spider-Man's Haymaker off, you have to discard 3 other cards in your hand in order to charge it up. The other interesting mechanic you have in here is that every character has things they can do both as their heroic side and as their alter ego. So Spider-Man and Tony Stark may be able to fight as their superhero sides, but they can go back to their alter ego in order to develop more scientific materials, which builds them more cards or gains them special items from their deck. The game has a lot of elements of give and take, and you'll always have to make a lot of very challenging decisions in order to decide how to best save the day.
The next game on our list is Disney Villainous. So in this game, you are playing, obviously, Disney villains. What's really unique about the gameplay is that every villain is trying to accomplish something different. So it makes every game different. No two people are trying to do the same thing. It's also unique because you have 2 different decks. So one deck is your personal deck where you're pulling your own cards from, but the other one is called your Fate deck, and that has all of the heroes from the character's movie, and your opponent is playing those to mess with you. So in the top of your realm, that's where the Fate cards will go down, and it will stop you from being able to accomplish some things. So then you want to use your allies and weapons whenever you can to fight those heroes.
While the gameplay can be fun and friendly, it can also be very cutthroat, as playing the Fate deck against each other at opportune times is really crucial to the game. Your mechanics are basically move a piece, do what it says on that board, move again the next time, and it comes with a great instructional tutorial guide to tell you what your strategy should be. They do also have a Marvel version of this game, and there is a Star Wars one coming out as well. They each play slightly differently though, so you can't mix and match them together. So you might look at what the differences are between them when you go to pick one up. I personally prefer the Disney one, the OG, but you might have a different preference yourself. Next up is an oldie but a goodie, and yes, one that Haley has had a slightly rough experience playing in the past. But it was so fun.
I know what you're talking about.
War of the Ring, based of course on Lord of the Rings. More so the novels than the films. In our other video we talk about Star Wars Rebellion, and this has some of the same DNA to it. So if you like one, you'll probably like the other. So in War of the Ring, each player plays as either the Fellowship, basically, or the Free Peoples, or as Sauron and his forces. And the way that you play, depending on which side you are, is very different. As Sauron, you are constantly generating armies, either from Mordor or from Isengard, and sending them out to the different capitals and cities of Middle-earth in order to conquer them through military conquest. Conversely, if you find Frodo in the ring, you win that way too. But that's the challenge that the Free Peoples player has to try to pose against you. So they control the Fellowship, and basically only the Fellowship at the beginning of the game. And as they walk from Rivendell, trying to march towards Mordor, they can make pit stops over in major cities and try to rouse the populace by convincing them to join their army. You're trying to sneak Frodo and Sam into Mordor with the ring to, of course, throw it into Mount Doom. So there's kind of 2 things going on at the same time.
The next game is Cascadia. This game was, or still is, all the rage. Like, this was the hottest game last year. It is worth the hype. So you're creating an ecosystem in the Pacific Northwest. So there's like 5 different terrain types. Each turn is very simple. You collect 1 terrain tile and 1 animal token that has to match a symbol on one of your tiles that you've already placed. And then you get points based on the arrangement for each animal type, which is decided by a card at the beginning of the game.
There's 2 major elements to score the game. One is, as Haley mentioned, the patterns for the animals, which are determined by the cards, and that'll change every game. So sometimes, for instance, your salmon, who are always trying to follow their mating paths, will go in a straight line across the board. Sometimes they'll want to be in kind of a cluster. It'll change all the time depending on which card draw you're going to have, and it gives a lot of variety. The other thing that gives you a lot of points is trying to get large matching sections of different biomes. So you either get as much water as you can, as much grasslands, as much ice caps,
Forest.
as you can, all different terrain types.
This is another one that's for multiple players, but works really, really well in a 2-player game. It's really well balanced.
Last but not least is another Lord of the Rings title. Basically, it's kind of like a role-playing game with 3D elements that uses an app in order to tell a story. Just like you're playing like a Dungeons and Dragons game. But the app will control all the story elements, tell you where to move the monsters, how much they attack for, what they attack with. Everyone involved can just play the story and enjoy exploring the map, finding new secrets, and just working together as a team without someone having to set everything up and act as the DM every time. So what we ended up doing, actually, since it does scale for higher player counts, and it's fun to level up your characters, is we each play with 2 characters, and we'll have 4 people on the map and just rotate between all of our characters.
And it's not as hard or confusing as that might sound.
So basically in the game, there's 2 different modes that you'll play through. Most of the game is on the overworld map, which is kind of a zoomed out version of Middle-earth. And you'll move your characters along to different location markers, exploring what's on each site. Sometimes finding villains, sometimes finding puzzles, but all the time evolving and finding elements of a story that work towards an overall narrative. The other aspect is whenever you get to like a boss fight, the map will zoom in and have you put down a battle board instead. And that has fewer spaces that are wider, and they're meant to hold a lot of goblins or big monsters, and that'll be a more tactical kind of combat mission instead. All right, guys, and that is our, not necessarily top 10, but that is definitely 10 more 2-player board games, or games that work very well for 2 players. So hopefully that helped you find some new games you might want to have a look at or add to your collection. If you have some that you think we've missed, there's a ton of good 2-player board games we know that we missed out there.
These are just our favorites.
Yeah, for the moment. There's even a few more. As we were sitting down to record this, we were like, oh, we forgot this one. So I'm sure we'll do another one of these in the future. But yeah, if you have some suggestions of your own, let us know in the comments. Keep it civil. As always, thanks for joining us here on Player's Companion, and we will see you guys next time.